All right, everybody. Welcome, welcome. This is the Holistic Pharmacy Podcast, and I'm live streaming today. And I have on with me a very special guest. Her name is Laura Baum. She's the founder of Laura's Botanicals, and she's a holistic business development coach. So, welcome, Laura, to the show.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's been my pleasure. We've known each other for probably a couple of years now and been following each other on social media. And I have to say, I love what you're doing now. So, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about your background, how you came into the holistic field, and then into the business field?
Yeah, we have been aware of each other and acquaintances for a while, right? And I think we've had like a couple different calls over the years, just like checking in, seeing what we were up to. We're both so busy. So it's great to finally kind of like get to a point, both of us to be able to like actually collaborate, which is so exciting. And we in my company, I've had a bit of a journey over the last few years, as I imagine many of your listeners, many of you all have had, with just the pandemic and changing things around and figuring out what was needed, but also like this natural burst of energy that happened in the holistic and wellness industry, where everybody became very aware of their bodies and having to pay attention to their bodies closer. And so we're kind of like all just like catching up to that demand, and also making sure that we are developing our skills so we can be even more responsible and better equipped to serve people. So we've gone through that journey ourselves. And I am a former clinical herbalist, although I still have many things that I do that involve herbalism. I just don't keep a clinical practice as into the extent that I used to, because I transfer my energy to a hybrid form of business where I started doing online programs instead of just the in-person service-based session. And I now help other holistic health business owners who are service-based do the exact same thing. So being able to transfer their authenticity and their energy and their work from in person to the online digital ecosystem, digital space, not because you're going to completely be there. In fact, you shouldn't, especially now with the maturity of our economy and the maturity of the digital space, but because you're able to utilize that space and break down some of your in-person marketing and sales tasks into more efficient, simpler ways, and to make your businesses more sustainable. So that's been the biggest effect that the changes have had on my business. I was formerly doing 40 or 50 hours in person, lots of single sessions, bringing in new people every single month into the business instead of over a longer period of time. So shorter retention. Now I have longer retention of customers. And also I was limited by the spaces I was serving in. And now I have more digital footprint where I can literally serve my ideas and principles anywhere on the globe.
Wow, I love that. And it's definitely very similar to my journey. And it sounds like a very natural progression, right? Like as you were building these things for yourselves, you saw the next problem and you were solving for the next problem. And it sounds like you kind of have it figured out. And I've been loving your master classes that you host and where you teach different principles. And I think I heard this story already on one of those classes, but I'd love for you to tell the audience what got you interested in herbalism in the first place.
Well, herbalism was something that I was not aware of prior to becoming into herbalism. I had no awareness of therapeutics of plants. I mean, when you get sick, you go to a doctor. When you get really sick, you go to an ER, right? Like there's just, I did not have that type of body literacy or awareness of medicine to that kind of extent. I grew up in dance. So I grew up in a very body centered type of principle. I did that 7 days a week competitively for from the age 4 until age 22. And I went to college for theater arts and dance in New York City. And while I was living there, I became aware that I wanted to start gardening some plants, but I was limited by my fire escape and I wanted some space. So if I had known now what I knew then, I probably would have tapped into some different communities while I was living in New York, but I just wasn't aware of it yet. And it wasn't until a health crisis in 2012, anaphylaxis, that I became aware that some plants were toxic to me because of fertilizers that were applied. as well as GMO crops. And my mind was like, what's going on with our food supply? And I started going to local activism, organizational meetings, and learning about food, and got introduced to different groups who had community gardens. And so I started gardening and growing plants. And I really felt connected to herbs. And everybody's like, you really like herbs. Like they seem to really grow well for you. And I was like, yeah, they're really interesting. And then it was like, well, I have this amazing rosemary plant. What am I going to use it for? And then I'm Googling, what can I use rosemary for? And then it's pulling up recipe after recipe. And I was still in a very New York state of mind, which everybody who knows New York knows that phrase, the Nas lyric, and a very famous rap song. And of course, it's highly commercialized now, but that's the original source if people are curious. And I was just always in a rush. And I was in a certain like activism meeting with a friend. I was leaving in a hustle away from the meeting. And on the street in Richmond, where I'm now currently located, there was a passion flower growing up a trellis. And it stopped me. I literally physically stopped in my tracks to look at this plant that was like staring at me. And it was this most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And I had no terminology of botany or taxonomy, which of course I didn't know those words then, of course. And I was like, trying to describe and trying to remember this flower. And later on, I couldn't let it go out of my attention. It held my attention that long. And it slowed me down. And that was, to me, it felt so important that I should pay attention to it. So I Googled like all the characteristics I could think of. And I discovered it was Southern passion flower. It was Passiflora incarnata. And that it had anxiolytic properties. And it was an ability to work at the similar level as other anti-anxiety medications, sometimes even better. And I was like, what? Like plants can be not just used for food, but used for medicine. And that's when I discovered herbology, and we discovered there was actually a whole medium of taking care of your body, and that this was something that I was not aware of. I grew up, my grandmother had a garden, but it was like, she was a Depression era grandma. So it was like, this is just something you do. This is something you did to survive. And so I was aware of it from the peripheral. And thank God I was a late 80s baby. I still had a lot of outside time. It was like, you go outside, you don't come back until dinner. Like I was very naturally comfortable, but didn't have the literacy or language until my mid 20s, early to mid 20s.
Yeah, I hear you. And there's so many points in that story I want to grab onto. Well, first of all, every time I speak to you, I learn something new. And I had no idea you were a dancer for so many years. I too was a dancer, not competitive, but something that I hold near and dear to my heart. And I still try to go out and dance, ecstatic dance, whatever kind of classes of dance, choreography. I love it all.
Yeah.
And the passion flower story, I think, is just so powerful because it really does show you that plants, number one, slow us down, like you said. And I think that's so important and maybe missed even in modern day speak, right? You said New York City, right? Hustling and bustling. And where is the time for rest and digest and decompression? So that's one of the powers, is that it reminds us, hey, you don't have to like go a mile a minute. You can just be here now. And the fact that you didn't know taxonomy or how to classify plants or any of the words that we use in botany, you still were able to do. And this is what I teach my students, is to understand the vocabulary and then search for those plants online, because using an app is not a very great tool, in my opinion, for identification. So it's much better to know those botanical terms and then to search for what you observe, if that's kind of like the first tool that I have at my disposal. So I love everything that you are sharing. And I want to ask you, why did you take that step, not only to recognize that, okay, herbs are great, maybe they're helpful to you personally. How did you decide to take that step and commit to going to a clinical herbalism program?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was obsessed immediately. Like I was like absolutely obsessed, and met another person in a plant Facebook group who also was. And we decided to create space and conversation in our area because we saw that it lacked, and started teaching and bringing on teachers. It was immediately organic. And from there, I started in my own personal healing, and from listening to other people, I began to connect the dots. And I felt like the reason why I was compelled so much, because it was a deeper calling that was denied through my ancestry, that we kind of ignored for a long time. If I go back further in my past, I mean, everybody in my family were farmers. there was like this one guy who was not. He created fences, like really interesting engineer type of person, a stonemason. But other than that, like my last name is Baum. It means tree in German. We are tree people. We also have Cherokee ancestry. So it was like a kala, that calling. It was immediately like, this is what you're supposed to be doing. As natural as it felt to discover it, it was as natural as it was to actually commit to it. And realize that the importance of, for me, I think, and my reason for being is defining what it means in the modern era and helping people feel comfortable using their voices to express themselves to better help people in their communities.
Wow. I really love that as well. And can you share, sort of how you were alluding to before, what were the pros and the cons to starting your own herbal business, and why did you then go on to solve for those problems?
Well, when I was first learning and I did, apprenticeships, courses, certifications, everybody was very naturally like, and this is not a bad thing. It's just a thing that emerges consistently, no matter what industry you're in. You become very siloed in your industry. And so for me, I have always loved diversity. I lived in New York. I mean, I believe in everybody influencing each other. And so I just wanted to kind of branch out and help figure out how we could solve some of our problems of being siloed and only one directional by applying and cross pollinating other strategies in other industries. And so I intentionally invested in people who were not herbalists and holistic health practitioners to learn business from and marketing from. And when I started my business, it was very much in the trajectory of what I had been taught. And that was, it's not like necessarily a limitation. It's just not the only way.
Yeah, I hear you. So what were the first things that you did to improve kind of the business model?
Well, my part of my journey to start herbalism consistently as a business and a lifestyle was because I had anaphylaxis. I've had a 10-year really intense, and personal healing journey that, do I go completely conventional or do I completely holistic? And so I've had to have this beautiful marriage of the two spaces, right? I have an EpiPen in my bag, like I have to. I have to be aware of my body in a particular nuanced way, that's similar to other autoimmune individuals. And so my business model could not be unsustainable. And it was initially looking at numbers, looking at activities, and that is just generally the one that is the most popular amongst a lot of herbalists and holistic health practitioners, the single service session model, the in-person brick and mortar, and the physical product-based business. A lot of herbalists think that's the only way, or they think that's the way they have to get started. That's what I've heard a lot of people say. I'm just going to get started with this. And I'm like, what? Just learn from me. I got started with that too. And I ended up thinking it wasn't going to be very successful. So a lot of people go in with this mindset of thinking, this is how I'm going to start because I don't know that it can be successful. But I'm telling you, the demand is there. This is like $1 trillion industry at this point. You have to be ready to be ready for that and expect it, instead of going in thinking unexpectedly. If you go in expecting it, you're going to come in with a much more sustainable mindset of thinking a more simple and strategic way to grow your business and think about the numbers you really want to achieve and go for it. So that's the big reason why I had to switch and be like, okay, how can I do this service? How can I make big impact on the income that I want without it draining my battery? And without it burning out my body each week? And I'm not going to be in 5 different facilities each week. These are not going to be what I'm going to be doing. And so that's what I had to do. I had to fix that, change that, and solve that problem first. So I like getting people who are not yet there because they're not quite burned out yet. But at the same time, just because you are successful doesn't mean that burnout is not going to continue happening. There has to be, everybody at every level can have these problems, right? You can have a lot of money and still not have a sustainable business, right? So it's something that we can all start applying and learning and making sure that your business is attuned and aligned with who you really are, being honest with yourself. And then 2, not replicating just because you think somebody else is successful with that method. You have to make it work for you.
Yeah, it sounds like a truly holistic way of approaching it, which is why your title makes sense because you're looking at it from the individual that's running and creating the business and what are their goals? What is their definition of success, right? Is it money at the cost of burning out? Is it that it's sustainable because they have to take care of their health, right? Hopefully, we're all, like you said, after the pandemic, looking at our health and valuing it a lot more. And that's why there's, such a surge of interest in herbalism among other holistic modalities. So the systematic approach and building the structure, it sounds like, is kind of the first thing that you do. And you work from like a goal and then breaking it down into what needs to happen for you to reach those goals. Am I getting this right?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing we would do is talk honestly about the numbers and the actual desires and think a little bit about comfort level of each individual because there are things that you're already doing and so you have to be aware of what things are working and what things are not immediately, and then we have to work on a little bit of the things that we know we're never going to actually be comfortable with and just thinking about why that discomfort exists, and then we have to then be like, well, what are the other things then that you actually have been trying to dabble in but you haven't quite invested in? Chances are there's a skill set there that has to be developed, and we're going to have to break down which ones are going to get us to the ultimate goal in the order, the right order, and then match it to our effort, and not just go for it randomly, but really plan those things out strategically. And yes, health is an operation. It should be. It's something that should be built into our businesses, not something that we just think of afterthought. Because in this day and age, we're going to have to be much more protective of those boundaries in business.
Yeah, especially with being reachable, right, all the time. It's like I even said the other day, you know what? You can't even get lost anymore, right? Because all these devices can track us and it kind of takes the mystery out of life a little bit. But I wanted to ask you, for those people that you keep mentioning, you have to look at the numbers in order to see where you need to go, right? But I know a lot of people have resistance, right? Like to even look at the numbers. It's like, I want to be clinical. This is what I care about. And then I don't even want to. I want to put my head down in the sand. I don't even want to look at my numbers. So how do you overcome that? And what are the important, and maybe giving us a simple way of starting to track what's important?
Yeah, every business owner should know their KPIs. They should, if they're growing a business, not you're not having to grow your business at all times. That's what's so beautiful about business ownership is that you can kind of choose that. I know I have worked with some practitioners, have some practitioners in my close circle who they're really happy with their client load. They don't need to grow their business right now, so they're not. Like they are happy, and people are staying for their packages. Then at some point, naturally, you're probably going to need to, depending on how long your clients are being retained for, you're going to have to bring in some new clients. So then you choose, well, what ways have we used in the past? And do we want to be more effective with these ways? Looking at numbers, I mean, if for me in my company, I was contrasting, in-person marketing activities versus online, and then seeing, okay, how many events, what was the cost of the event? How many leads did I get those events? And now look at the digital events and compare the two. And I found that digital activities, once I started understanding and had the skills developed to generate leads online whenever I wanted and increasing it whenever I wanted, I was getting a much better cost per lead. So everybody in their business, we have to, as CEOs, understand how much it takes money-wise and energy-wise to bring in a client. So the cost per lead, how much that actually costs to have a lead join your Facebook group or join your email list, how much it costs for your leads to get them onto conversations and phone calls, sales calls, and then, actually buy into the product. And then you can get, you understand there, how much you invested versus how much you actually got out of it and what that conversion rate looks like. So knowing your general sales conversion rate as well. And of course, that just gets easier when you're using digital because I mean, you can literally count the number of conversations you have in person and then how many of that percentage you did over a particular measured time period to know that KPI for in-person marketing only. But those are some of the things you should know because then you can actually calculate how many leads you need to have for another goal. So if my goal was, just a few $1,000s and I know the cost of my initial the product that I'm having them go into, I can then calculate per my conversion rate how many people I need to bring into my next launch, for example.
Yeah, yeah, I hear all of that and it makes sense. It's just, I think, sounds kind of daunting for somebody who, has never done it before and now they have to like put on this hat where they're not just delivering the service if they're the main practitioner, they're also now that hat of a business owner and that involves looking at your numbers, which I think is just a big hurdle for a lot of people, myself included. And
Yeah. I
so
have a I have a sales calculator though that I use. Like I have a simple calculator. All people have to tell me is their product name, their product price rather, and their goal and their general conversion rate. The standard conversion rate is 20% for sales close calls. That's the average. So if you're not really good at sales, you're probably around the 20%. It could be higher, depending on how nurturing and how good you are at sales. And so figuring out where that leak is happening is crucial. I mean, if you are hitting those percentages each time because you said, okay, this is the calculation and you're still not hitting that, that means your sales number is actually a little bit lower and you can work on your sales. If we don't work on it mathematically and quantitatively, we'll never realize what the actual problem is in our business. So that all we need to know is the cost of our offer, and we need to know how many people we want to bring into that offer. So the number that we're trying to reach, that's all you need to know. And then, your general close rate. And if you don't know, probably your average is 20%.
yeah. And I
So
also want to touch on the sustainability aspect, right? So I understand it's different for every person, but I think a lot of people go into business, any kind of business, with the question mark of like, well, will this be sustainable, right? That's a big fear. So for an herbalism business, right? You mentioned a lot of people think, okay, maybe it won't be that successful, right? That's kind of the mindset. So what's the reality about, could this be a sustainable full-time job or business for somebody?
yeah, and sustainability comes from knowing your numbers and knowing your simplicity and your focus. If you know who you're trying to actually work with, for example, and making sure that everything, depending on your level, if you're a startup, you shouldn't be applying $1 million, $1 billion ideas to your business. You should be focusing on sales and profit generating activities in your business because you're trying to get to a predictable revenue. So we want to first focus on your offer, make sure that it's market ready, market validated, and the cost is workable and aligned with your company vision. And that will help you understand exactly each time how you're going about it. We're not trying to fit people into our offer. We're going to the people who are right for our offer, putting it in front of them strategically and repeating the process. So sustainability is knowing exactly what you want to do, your mission, your goals, both in personal and your company vision. And it's aligning all the activities around that purpose.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. And I think it's really important that instead of just like manipulating people, right, not thinking about sales that way, but thinking about actually looking for the people that are already there that need and want your product or service because it's solving their problem. So I love that. And with that said, there are two main approaches about people that are starting a business, right? Like the cold turkey, I'm just going to go all in, or I'm going to have my, job on the side that creates stable income because that is making me feel safe enough to take risks in my business. Like, which have you seen work the best?
Both. It depends on the person. It's about making sure you're honest with the time that you have for your business and making sure that with the time you use, it's absolutely doing the things that are going to turn the dial in the business. So that is the thing. You have to realize which things are the things that are going to move the profit generating activities forward. All it takes is a little bit of analysis and understanding where you're currently at, what you're currently doing, and mapping out intentionally what things have actually worked the most. So a lot of people don't tend to do that and they just are trying a bunch of different things. And so it takes a little bit of analyzing and reflection and honesty. And once you see that for sure, you're on the right path.
Yeah, and when it comes to like spreading yourself too thin, if you have another job or if you're doing all the things in your business, how do you take the first step to kind of lessening your load and taking things off your plate?
If you're currently like working a job, I mean, there are businesses and companies that have started and created six figures in a year while working 9 to 5s. I mean, really high intensity jobs. So again, it's just individualized. I think that the best thing to do is to make a super productive work hour each day, and you have to honor your commitment to yourself if this is really what you want to do. If you're really focusing on growing a company while working a 9 to 5, then make sure again that you have understood what that hour should look like to really push the needle forward. So if you know that are working to bring in 5 people into your $5,000 offer, it's a 20K launch, sales launch, right? You're trying to, again, map out exactly what it is that you should do to get those customers. And that is the activity that you plan each and every single day for the course of the time until you reach the goal.
I love it. Well, Laura,
And nothing else.
Yeah.
Like nothing else. So, I mean, that's where it gets complicated is people are just like, well, I should be posting. And so that's going to generate the attraction. Really look at your activities. Did that actually make that happen? And if it didn't, I don't know if that should be your core concentration. And don't just delegate. You have to be aware of the things and you have to hit certain goals before you do that.
Yeah, such good insights. It's really gold what we're talking about here. And I think there's an art, right, of like testing things out yourself and giving yourself room to experiment, and then really looking down and, like you said, being honest with yourself and understanding which activities are priority for you at the stage that you're in. So, Laura, I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing all this wisdom with us. And if you have just one more minute, I'd love to do a rapid fire round with you.
Okay.
Okay, beautiful.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is what I ask all my guests. So what's your number one advice for somebody to improve their quality of life right now?
One thing to improve your quality of life is to, that's a hard question. It's like one thing to improve your quality of life. I think that for me, like life is improved with organization. So, being able to simplify a process to the point where you can still have joy in your work. So organizing does that for me. I think that's the answer. And I think that too, understanding the workflow can be actually a very creative and joy-filled process, the organized workflow.
Yeah, I love it. And as
Yeah.
a business owner, right, what's the number one thing people should do right now if they have a business, like to move the needle forward for them?
Well, right now we are in an economy that's on a turn down. Like people are buying less. So right now, optimizing your offer to ensure that it's still relevant and making sure that the people that you're putting in front of can actually afford it. And that might need to transition. So what used to sell might not sell right now. So you just figuring that out. And really making sure that your messaging is a little bit tweaked and repositioned for the economy we're in because of the influence of AI.
I love it. And then can you just share what are your top two activities that you do both for your life, your health, and your business?
So for health, keeping a garden and having my holistic lifestyle workspace, these are two pillars that I talk about pretty routinely as I help health practitioners create businesses by offering them a coaching model so they don't have to create it themselves. But so those are the two principles there based on my own market research over the years for things that absolutely help to influence not just health, but healthful living at home. So I absolutely love the garden for its many therapeutic reasons. I offer a workbook all about it, and then I have my free digital course all about creating a holistic workspace in the home. Because if you have a yoga mat and a yoga outfit, you're going to go to the yoga class. So we have to do the same thing with herbalism and holistic lifestyle. We have to have it right there visually in front of us to remind us to not just be holistic, but to practice holistic.
I love that. And lastly, because you're an herbalist, I will ask you, what is your number one herb right now that you're utilizing for yourself or clients?
Lavender. Lavender it was in bloom and I used it quite a bit this season. It's so calming and it's the perfect purple. I really do think it's been crucial this year.
I've been having a lot of lavender too, and it used to be very strong for me in a tea, but now I just pile it in and I absolutely love it. So, Laura, again, thank you so much for coming on. How can people learn more about your work and get in touch with you?
Find me on Facebook, Laura Baum. I'm also on LinkedIn, and all of those links are on my Facebook timeline to connect on LinkedIn professionally. I'm always open to having a conversation about collaboration. And we're doing a thing together, aren't we? Yeah, we have our live class on July 9th. So that would be a great opportunity to get those 5 essential activities to generate more revenue and to think about how to align your messaging a bit more strategically and, bring any of your questions that you might have had from this talk with Marina. And yeah, you can also, follow me on Facebook and Instagram. All those links again are on my timeline. So happy to chat.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I will be putting the link down to register under the show notes and also under the Facebook video where we're streaming. So be sure to register or also reach out to me if you need the link. So thanks for being here and have a great day, everybody.